The moment the woman everyone in the city knew as untouchable fell into the swimming pool, she did not scream for help. She simply disappeared beneath the clear blue water, while hundreds of people at the charity resort stood frozen in shock. Then a single dad jumped in after her without thinking about his expensive suit, his job, or the fact that the woman drowning in front of him was the most powerful CEO in the room. He reached her just as she began to sink, pulled her toward the surface, and held her against his chest as sunlight reflected across the water. But when the woman opened her eyes and saw the face of the stranger who had saved her, something inside her broke open. A memory she had buried for 20 years came rushing back, one she had spent her entire adult life trying to forget. And suddenly, the man holding her was connected to the one moment that had changed her life forever. Before we continue, if you believe that kindness can give people a second chance and that one small act can change an entire life, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to Hardworking Dad. Your support helps us bring more stories like this to you. Her name was Seraphina Vale, a 41-year-old CEO whose name appeared on buildings, business magazines, and television screens across the country. She had built Vale Meridian Group from a small investment firm into a powerful international company, but behind the polished suits and controlled expressions was a woman who had learned very early that depending on people could be dangerous. She rarely smiled in public. She never talked about her childhood. She avoided swimming pools, lakes, and even hotel rooms with large balconies overlooking water. Her employees assumed it was simply another strange habit of a demanding executive. Nobody knew why she became visibly uncomfortable whenever she heard the sound of splashing water. That afternoon, Seraphina was attending a daytime charity event at an elegant countryside resort. The event raised money for children who had lost parents or were growing up in difficult circumstances. Ironically, she had donated millions to the foundation but had never allowed herself to become emotionally involved with its work. She believed money could solve problems without requiring her heart to become part of them. Among the guests was a 36-year-old single father named Callan Mercer, who worked as a maintenance supervisor at the resort and had been invited because his 9-year-old son, Milo, was receiving assistance from the foundation after losing his mother several years earlier. Callan was not wealthy, influential, or famous. His dark hair was neatly trimmed, his white shirt had been carefully ironed that morning, and his shoes had visible signs of years of hard work. He had brought Milo because he wanted his son to see that difficult beginnings did not have to determine the rest of his life. Callan noticed Seraphina from a distance but paid little attention to her. He had no reason to approach a billionaire CEO, and he was far more concerned with making sure Milo ate lunch before running around the resort. But while Callan was carrying a tray toward one of the outdoor tables, a young guest accidentally bumped into a waiter near the pool. A tray tipped. Glasses crashed. People stepped backward in confusion. Seraphina, who had been standing near the pool's edge, instinctively moved away from the falling glass. Her heel caught against the edge of a wet stone. For one terrifying second, she lost her balance. Then she slipped backward and fell directly into the deep end. The entire atmosphere changed instantly. Callan dropped everything and ran. He did not stop to consider who she was. He jumped into the pool fully dressed, reached beneath the water, and found her struggling. When he pulled her upward, her eyes were closed and her body was frighteningly still. He kept one arm beneath her shoulders and fought toward the edge until another staff member helped them out. Seraphina coughed violently, drawing in air as water streamed from her hair and expensive clothes. Callan remained beside her until he was certain she could breathe. Then she looked at him. For several seconds, neither of them moved. Seraphina stared at Callan's face as though she had seen a ghost. His features were not familiar in any ordinary way, yet something about his eyes, the calmness in his expression, and the way he instinctively protected the person beside him triggered something buried deep inside her mind. Suddenly she was no longer 41 years old. She was 11 again. She could see another pool. Another sunny afternoon. Another little girl sitting alone beside the water while adults argued somewhere inside a large house. She remembered being angry and frightened, running away from everyone and slipping near the edge of the family pool. She remembered falling into the water. She remembered the desperate feeling of sinking. Most of all, she remembered a young boy jumping in after her. He had been the son of a groundskeeper, a poor child who was always told to stay away from the wealthy family's guests. He had pulled her from the water and carried her to safety. But before anyone could properly thank him, the boy's father had been blamed for allowing his son near the private pool, and the family had been dismissed that very evening. Seraphina had spent years believing that boy's name was lost forever. But now, looking at Callan, she suddenly remembered it. Callan Mercer. The boy who had saved her life. The discovery left her shaken more deeply than the fall itself. She quietly asked where he had grown up, and his answers slowly confirmed what her memory had been screaming. His father had worked for her family. His family had been forced to leave after the accident. Callan had been 11 years old when he jumped into the pool for her. What Seraphina had never known was what happened afterward. Callan's father had struggled to find stable work. His family moved between small towns. His mother became ill. Callan left school early to help support the household. Years later, he became a maintenance worker, married, and had a son named Milo. But his wife died unexpectedly after a long illness, leaving Callan to raise their son alone. He never became rich. He never chased fame. Yet despite everything life had taken from him, he had kept the one quality Seraphina had slowly lost, the willingness to help someone without asking what it would cost him. Seraphina spent the rest of the afternoon unable to concentrate. The businesswoman who could negotiate million-dollar contracts without blinking sat alone beneath the shade of a tree, staring at the pool. She remembered another detail now. Before the boy was taken away, he had placed his own small jacket around her shoulders because she was shaking. She remembered the warmth of that jacket more clearly than she remembered the faces of most relatives who had surrounded her growing up. She had spent decades believing wealth had protected her. Now she realized that a child with almost nothing had protected her when she had needed it most. But there was another painful truth. The family had never thanked him. Nobody had searched for him. Nobody had offered his family compensation. Her parents had treated the incident as an inconvenience and moved on. Seraphina had grown into an ambitious woman determined to build a life where nobody could ever control her again. Somewhere along the way, however, she had confused independence with emotional isolation. The next morning, Seraphina did something she had never done before. She visited Callan's modest home. She did not arrive with cameras, assistants, or a public relations team. She came alone. Callan was outside repairing a bicycle while Milo sat nearby working on a school project. When Seraphina explained who she was, Callan became silent. He remembered the little girl from the pool immediately. But instead of accepting money, he told her that he had never saved her expecting anything in return. That sentence struck her harder than anything else. Seraphina realized that Callan's kindness had survived without recognition, while her own heart had become harder despite receiving every advantage life could offer. She asked about Milo's education, and she learned that the boy had dreams of becoming an engineer but worried about the cost of college. Seraphina offered assistance, but this time she did something different. She did not simply write a check and walk away. She created a scholarship program through the foundation specifically for children being raised by single parents. Then she expanded it. She hired counselors, created educational grants, and funded childcare programs for working fathers and mothers who had been forced to choose between earning money and caring for their children. Callan became involved as an advisor, not because he wanted wealth, but because he understood the struggle firsthand. Months passed, and something unexpected happened. Seraphina began changing outside the foundation too. She started eating lunch with employees. She listened to people instead of immediately judging them. She visited children's centers without photographers. She learned Milo's favorite books and attended his school presentation. Callan remained cautious, but slowly he began seeing that the powerful woman from the pool was becoming someone entirely different. One bright afternoon, nearly a year after the accident, Seraphina stood beside the same pool where everything had changed. This time there were no cameras and no wealthy guests. There were children laughing, parents sitting beneath umbrellas, and volunteers preparing food. Callan stood nearby with Milo, watching as Seraphina walked toward the water. For years, she had avoided pools because they reminded her of fear. Now she looked at the water and remembered something else. She remembered a little boy who had jumped in without thinking. She remembered the feeling of being carried to safety. And she finally understood that the memory had never been about drowning. It had been about being saved. Seraphina stepped closer to the water, smiled, and held out her hand to Milo. The boy took it. Together they walked along the edge while Callan watched with a quiet smile. Sometimes life does not return the people who saved us in the way we expect. Sometimes it brings them back when we are finally ready to understand what their kindness meant. Seraphina had spent 20 years building walls around her heart, believing strength meant never needing anyone. Callan had spent 20 years living with less than he deserved, yet he had never allowed hardship to turn him cruel. And when their paths crossed again, she discovered that the greatest fortune in life was not money, power, or success. It was having a heart that could still recognize kindness when it came back. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who believes people can change, and subscribe to Hardworking Dad. Your engagement may seem small, but it helps these stories reach people who need a reminder that kindness still matters. And before the story ends, here is a special request: comment the words, "Kindness comes back," below if you believe that a good deed can return to us years later in ways we never expect. Because sometimes the person we save becomes the person who saves us. And sometimes the memory we spend years running from is actually the memory that was meant to lead us home. That afternoon, Seraphina finally stepped into the pool. Not because she had forgotten what happened there, but because she finally remembered why she had survived.